Somewhere off the misty coast of Haida right now, a killer whale is slicing through the frigid swell of the Pacific with a bizarre, perfectly circular hole carved into her flank. It is a clean, sharp crater, roughly 5 centimeters across, the exact diameter of a standard Canadian coffee mug, punched straight down through dense skin and insulating blubber into the deep red muscle beneath. She carries several of these wounds along her side. The matriarch and calves swimming in her wake bear the exact same markings. If you spend an afternoon sifting through the identification catalogs curated over decades by Fisheries and Oceans Canada at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo, or archives tracking marine mammals from the Beaufort Sea down through temperate coastal fjords, that identical geometric signature reappears across hundreds of individual animals. A pristine, perfectly scooped hemisphere, repeated with mechanical precision, every standard marine ecology text taught across Canadian universities underlines a single foundational rule. The killer whale has no natural predator. A fully grown individual is 6 tons of hydrodynamic power, armed with formidable sensory intelligence, and a brain second only to our own. In British Columbia's coastal waters, transient Biggs orcas dispatch stellar sea lions with surgical coordination. Out in the open pelagic zones, they will systematically wear down and drown baleen whales many times their size. Great whites actively vacate their traditional grounds the moment an orcapod appears on the horizon. Yet out in the open ocean, something is routinely carving chunks of flesh out of these apex rulers while they are actively swimming. For over half a century, cetacean biologists and field researchers looked for an assailant that matched the whale's scale. They assumed the culprit had to be larger, faster, armed with massive jaw mechanics, and situated even higher on the marine trophic pyramid. They were looking in entirely the wrong direction. The creature responsible for those wounds is small enough to rest comfortably in the palm of your hand. Over the past several decades, this same miniature organism has also managed to disable acoustic navigation gear on deep submergence vessels and attacked a long-distance swimmer navigating open oceanic channels. My name is Ambrose Wield, and this investigation begins not with a predator, but with a lingering wound. Because for 50 years, the wound was the only tangible piece of evidence science possessed. Consider what that mark actually represents in physiological terms. It is an open, weeping crater exposed to harsh salt water on an animal that can never afford to stop swimming. In cold northern waters, an injury of that depth takes nearly 5 months to fully heal over and close. 5 long months of vulnerability, repeated continuously across the multi-decade lifespan of the ocean's supreme hunter. The true scope of this mystery is defined by just how untouchable the killer whale actually is in nature. Observe how she operates in her natural element. Off the rugged Pacific coastline, orcas have been documented ramming predatory sharks at high velocity and flipping them belly up. That deliberate inversion immediately induces tonic immobility, an involuntary paralysis reflex hardwired directly into a shark's primitive nervous system. The orca simply holds the immobilized shark upside down until it suffocates in the water column. In icy subpolar channels, pods synchronize their swimming into tight formations, creating coordinated wake surges that sweep seals directly off floating sea ice. In coastal feeding aggregations, specialized pods have been recorded systematically opening up large sharks purely to excise the energy-rich liver, leaving the rest of the carcass behind. When apex sharks witness this, they entirely abandon aggregation sites they have utilized for generations. Whatever is cutting those immaculate circles into our northern orcas is clearly not a great white, a sleeper shark, or any other large macro predator. Orcas readily consume all of them. That reality pointed researchers toward an organism that completely disregarded the established hierarchy of marine biology. An animal that went undetected for generations simply because, according to conventional ecological models, it had no logical right to exist. To decipher the attacker, you have to examine the wound itself under forensic detail. This is not the jagged tear of a skirmish, the scrape of a competitor's tooth, or the long parallel rakes left by another whale during social play. It is a precise, clean-edged crater between 4 and 6 centimeters in diameter, sliced neatly through tough dermal tissue, completely excavating the insulating blubber layer and cutting directly into the red muscular wall. It leaves behind an immaculate, smooth-bottomed depression, looking for all the world as if a mechanic had cored out a circular plug with a specialized punch tool. When marine researchers cataloging whale populations off Canada's Pacific and Atlantic coasts began systematically analyzing photo identification databases, stranding necropsies, and historical survey records, the full geographical scope of the phenomenon became impossible to ignore. Orcas photographed in northern temperate waters, animals documented through federal cetacean research program surveys, and individuals recorded in high-latitude polar ice were all carrying this exact same mechanical signature. It was an ecological fingerprint that spanned entire ocean basins, yet no Canadian coastal observer had ever witnessed the physical attack take place in domestic territorial waters. Then, a subtle pattern within the data began to emerge. In resident pods that remain within cold subpolar corridors and coastal fjords year-round, these distinctive marks were uniformly old, faded, smoothed over by scar tissue, and long since closed. Conversely, fresh, unhealed craters with raw edges and active tissue regeneration appeared almost exclusively on transient and pelagic individuals known to undertake extensive seasonal migrations southward into subtropical zones. The conclusion was undeniable. The assailant was never operating in our cold northern shelf waters. It was lying in wait thousands of kilometers south, in the deep, warm, open ocean, and our migratory megafauna were swimming directly into its path during their long-distance offshore journeys. That single insight transformed these mysterious scars into an unexpected scientific tool. Field biologists began reading bite marks as an unalterable biological travel record. If two killer whales surfaced side by side off the coast of Vancouver Island, one possessing a clean, unmarked flank, while the other was riddled with fresh, weeping gouges, researchers could instantly deduce that they had spent the preceding months in entirely different latitudes. You could chart the offshore wanderings of an apex animal without ever tagging it or drawing a drop of blood. The profile of the perpetrator was finally crystallizing. An animal so diminutive it had slipped past decades of oceanic research, ubiquitous across warm pelagic waters, and equipped with specialized anatomical machinery capable of coring flesh out of living marine giants. It was a shark, measuring scarcely 40 to 50 centimeters in total length. Placed on an examination table, it resembles nothing more than a dark, compact cigar with large, luminous eyes and an oddly blunt snout, something you might easily glance past without a second thought. Commercial fishers on offshore longline vessels colloquially named it the cookie cutter shark. Systematic taxonomy christened it Isistius brasiliensis, drawing upon the name of Isis, the ancient deity of light and mystery. That scientific designation holds the key to the creature's extraordinary mode of existence. By day, this diminutive elasmobranch stays hidden within the deep aphotic abyss, hovering at depths often exceeding 3,000 meters, where sunlight never penetrates and temperatures hover near zero. But as twilight falls across the open ocean, it begins a massive vertical ascent, riding upward in complete darkness toward the upper ocean layers. The cookie cutter does not commute in isolation. It ascends as part of the deep scattering layer, an incomprehensible mass of lanternfish, squid, and pelagic crustaceans that migrates vertically toward the surface every evening to feed, only to plunge back down into the abyss before dawn. It represents the single largest synchronized movement of animal biomass anywhere on our planet. Billions of tons of marine life, rising and falling thousands of meters every single day. And this tiny predator journeys upward within that living tide to mount its nocturnal ambush. Physics dictates that an animal less than half a meter in length should never be able to hold its ground in the open water column against an approaching oceanic giant. An orca, or a large pelagic fish cruising at high speed, would simply sweep a tiny organism aside in its pressure wave. The cookie cutter overcomes this hydrodynamic limitation through a remarkable metabolic adaptation, an extraordinarily enlarged liver, packed with low-density squalene and lipid compounds. This massive organ renders the shark virtually neutrally buoyant in the water column. Unlike most sharks that must maintain continuous forward propulsion to avoid sinking, the cookie cutter hangs completely stationary in the open pelagic drift. It expends almost zero energetic output, hovering silently in the black water column like an anchored mine, patiently waiting for an apex target to arrive. Its true brilliance, however, lies in its bio-optical camouflage. The ventral underside of the cookie cutter shark is carpeted with thousands of microscopic light organs called photophores, which emit a continuous, soft, greenish luminescence. This bioluminescent display operates on the principle of counter-illumination, functioning exactly like specialized camouflage coatings designed to conceal aircraft against a bright, overcast sky. When an apex predator hunts from below, it scans upward against the downwelling moonlight filtering through the surface layers. Any solid silhouette passing overhead normally stands out as a stark, black profile. The cookie cutter's glowing underbelly matches the ambient intensity and wavelength of the downwelling light with astonishing precision. The dark silhouette completely dissolves, and the shark effectively vanishes from view. Except for a single, deliberately unlit zone. Directly beneath its throat, the shark possesses a dark, transverse collar, completely devoid of photophores. Against the softly glowing backdrop of its radiant underside, this unlit collar creates a stark visual contrast that reads to an approaching hunter as a tiny, isolated fish swimming completely unprotected in open water. The entire ambush strategy is inverted. The bait is the only visible portion of the predator. When a bluefin tuna, a swordfish, or a migrating killer whale notices what looks like an easy, solitary snack, it accelerates to strike. At the critical split second of arrival, the tiny silhouette pivots. What follows is an astonishing feat of micromechanical predation. Highly specialized, fleshy suction lips expand and seal firmly against the prey's slick skin, generating a powerful vacuum lock, like a heavy-duty industrial suction clamp. The narrow, needle-like teeth of the upper jaw bite in, serving solely as an immovable mechanical anchor. The lower jaw performs the actual extraction. Relative to its overall body length, the cookie cutter possesses the largest and most robust dentition of any living shark species. These broad, triangular teeth interlock seamlessly edge to edge, forming a single, continuous, razor-sharp serrated band. Once anchored, the shark executes a vigorous 360-degree rotational twist of its entire body, using its lower jaw like an industrial hole saw. It cleanly cores out a conical plug of dense blubber and muscle tissue, disengages its suction seal, and slips back into the pitch-black depths before the host animal has even begun to process the localized trauma. This extreme ecological specialization is governed by ruthless metabolic economics. In the nutrient-sparse abyss, where essential minerals are exceptionally scarce, calcium cannot be squandered. When the lower dentition of the cookie-cutter shark eventually wears down or dulls, the entire lower row is shed not tooth by tooth, but as a single united blade, which the shark deliberately swallows and digests to reclaim its vital mineral content. No other elasmobranch species on Earth does this. The cookie cutter recycles its own weaponry, because forging new tools in the deep ocean carries an energetic cost it simply cannot afford to waste. There is a second, even more enigmatic phantom haunting the deep bathypelagic layers. Isistius plutotus, commonly known to science as the largemouth cookie cutter shark. Possessing an extraordinarily broad, disproportionate lower jaw, it gouges out immense, elongated plugs of tissue far larger than those created by its smaller relative. Its encounters with research vessels and deep-water submersibles are so exceedingly rare that almost the entirety of its life history, reproductive biology, and population distribution remains a complete blank in the global scientific literature. Its existence merely underscores how little we truly comprehend about the specialized fauna navigating the deepest oceanic trenches off our continental margins. These evolutionary marvels place the cookie cutter in an ecological category that fundamentally challenges conventional marine biology. It is an obligate ectoparasite that feeds almost exclusively on apex macropredators. In classical ecological theory, a predator must engage in physical combat, risk severe injury, and expend immense energy to fully subdue, kill, and consume its quarry. The cookie cutter completely bypasses this hazardous calculation. It does not need to win a life or death battle. It does not need to overpower a creature that outweighs it by several thousand kilograms. It merely requires unbroken physical contact for roughly 2 seconds. The host animal almost always survives the encounter, continuing its journey across the ocean while carrying the permanent circular gouge for the remainder of its life, with fatal outcomes occurring only when secondary bacterial infections take hold, or when an already compromised animal suffers multiple overlapping strikes. This is precisely where the phenomenon ceases to be an esoteric inquiry into cetacean biology and crosses directly into the realm of modern maritime engineering. In the later decades of the 20th century, patrol submarines operating on extended deep-water missions across the Atlantic and Pacific began returning to naval dockyards with inexplicable, catastrophic structural damage. Maintenance crews at major naval bases discovered clean, circular punctures bored straight through the thick, pressurized rubber domes that protected bow-mounted sonar arrays. Deep gouges were carved directly into specialized acoustic dampening tiles, and thick protective neoprene sleeves were systematically stripped from submerged sensor lines, exposing bare copper wiring directly to corrosive seawater. This was far from superficial cosmetic damage. A submarine's bow sonar dome is an exquisitely engineered, fluid-filled acoustic chamber calibrated to allow sound waves to pass cleanly without distortion. The moment that outer rubber membrane is breached, the internal fluid drains, ambient sea pressure crushes the internal housing, and the vessel is rendered functionally deaf in contested operational waters. When dozens of frontline vessels began limping back to port with compromised acoustic ears during the height of the Cold War, intelligence officers and defense researchers initially suspected covert sabotage by foreign naval adversaries using classified underwater interception technology. The breakthrough came when maritime defense researchers placed cross-sections of the damaged rubber fairings beneath a laboratory microscope. Marine biologists, examining the samples, immediately recognized the diagnostic signature that had been documented in whale necropsies for over a century. A perfectly circular perimeter, fine microscopic scoring from upper anchor teeth along the rim, and a continuous, clean shearing cut carved by an interlocking lower jaw. It was impossible to engineer an acoustic deterrent against an organism that had naturally evolved to identify a 50-meter hull as a slow-moving, blubber-rich pelagic whale. The only viable countermeasure was a complete structural retrofit, replacing vulnerable exterior rubber components with hardened fiberglass fairings capable of resisting the shark's suction seal. To this day, the same characteristic circular bites continue to appear on oceanographic sensor arrays, subsea communication cables, and autonomous acoustic gliders deployed across offshore monitoring networks. For generations, humans assumed our species was entirely excluded from this nocturnal feeding cycle, largely because people rarely swim in deep, pelagic waters in the middle of the night. Up until recently, the only documented instances of cookie-cutter marks on human skin were recorded during post-mortem examinations of open ocean drowning victims recovered by maritime search and rescue teams. Consequently, forensic pathologists had long classified the shark as an opportunistic scavenger that merely fed upon motionless targets floating at the surface. That clinical assumption was shattered on March 16, 2009, when long-distance marathon swimmer Mike Spaulding attempted a nocturnal crossing of the deep, rough oceanic channel between the Hawaiian islands of Hawaii and Maui. Around midnight, miles from the nearest shoreline above water, thousands of meters deep, he felt an acute, sharp sensation across his chest. He pushed forward through the dark swell. Moments later, a powerful impact struck his left leg with enough mechanical force to halt his forward momentum. When his support crew hauled him out of the black water and illuminated his leg aboard the support craft, They uncovered an immaculate, crater-like oval, sliced cleanly down to the muscular fascia. The subsequent clinical analysis, published in the scientific journal Pacific Science, established the first verified attack by a cookie-cutter shark on a living human being, confirming that from the perspective of an ambush predator looking upward against the surface glow, any warm-bodied silhouette kicking through the dark represents an identical feeding opportunity. When we envision the most formidable predator in the ocean, our imagination inevitably drifts toward sheer physical mass, razor-sharp rows of serrated teeth, and explosive speed. We instinctively picture the great white shark, the predatory bull shark, or the sovereign killer whale herself. Yet the creature that successfully feeds on all of them, without ever suffering a retaliatory blow, is an animal scarcely 40 centimeters long, weighing less than a common house cat. It never once had to engage in a territorial fight. By mastering the physics of natural light and turning its target's own predatory appetite into an irresistible lure, it carved out an untouchable niche in the global food web, vanishing back into the deep ocean trenches long before the monarchs of the sea even realized they had been struck. The ocean is not governed by the creatures that capture our imagination on wildlife posters. I am Ambrose Wield. The natural world is filled with unseen organisms rewriting the fundamental rules of ecological dominance, and we investigate another one every single week. Make sure to subscribe, and our next deep sea breakdown will be waiting for you.